Thanks so much for joining us here today. It is so good to have you back on the show. So, conventions. What do we think of political party conventions? Traditionally, I think what comes to mind for a lot of people who are invested in politics is like the presidential nominating conventions. Like last year when Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were both nominated to be their respective parties' nominees. So it's a big event. It's very fun. You get to have people from all over the country in one political party meeting in the same city to discuss ideas, to meet each other, to it's a convention. And anyway, this is like a every 4 years type of thing traditionally, and it's for those presidential election years. So we had in 2024, we had a virtual one for both parties in 2020. We had 2016, 2012, and like so. But amidst this political climate we find ourselves in, interestingly, I've noticed that a lot of the big names in politics are trying really hard to showcase their successes of whatever, even if one of the parties doesn't really have many successes to brag about per se, at least to the American people anyway. There's this big effort to showcase success, to showcase work that has been accomplished. And so, and on that note, in late August of this year, President Trump floated the idea of having a midterm convention. Now, like I said, usually these conventions are every 4 years for presidential years. President Trump floated the idea of another Republican National Convention happening before the 2026 midterms next year to showcase the successes of the first 2 years of the Trump administration. And it's not an easy task to put together these conventions. It actually takes years of planning. Like I remember the Chicago DNC planning for that began in 2021. City selection, then picking a venue, then arrangements. Like it takes a really long time to pick and really organize these. But whatever, Trump says he wants an RNC in 2026, so chances are he's going to get an RNC in 2026, right? So as those discussions began, there were talks on the Democratic side of also having conventions. I think the conversations on the Democratic side have not been as substantive compared to what maybe Trump is talking about, because obviously what Trump says goes in the party over there. But it seems like DNC Chair Ken Martin has been flirting with the idea of it, and I've heard from insider sources that there is serious discussion of it. It seems like they're gonna, from my understanding anyway, that I've heard, they're gonna try to pick a city for 2028, and then whatever's the runner-up will become the 2026 spot. Again, it's a lot of work to arrange in that short amount of time, but more power to them. If they can figure it out, if both parties can really figure it out, because ideally convention season would have been these past couple of weeks that have already now passed. But they're going to do what's best, and they'll figure out what they can achieve. But there's no final commitment from the Democratic side. It's just really conversations, preliminary conversations that are happening. And there is historical precedent for these types of things. Democrats have actually held midterm conventions in the 70s and the 80s. And then the tradition kind of faded away in the 80s after they were questioning the effectiveness and the cost and all of that stuff, because again, it is a huge undertaking, a huge spending of resources. Now, when we're talking about the motivations for something like a midterm convention, Republicans, I don't think it makes sense for them to do it, not because, it's a cost thing. I think Republicans have made their party platform the platform of stripping 17 million people off of their health care, shutting down rural hospitals, taking veterans and seniors off of food assistance, I just don't think it makes sense for them to go around showing that off. So if I was a political operative on the other side, I don't know. I don't think I would be so keen on showing off, because average Americans are definitely not happy with the policy decisions that this White House has been making and that the Republican Congress has been rubber stamping. But you know, he who sits in the White House decides what his party does. I think this is definitely far more valuable for Democrats. I think I made a TikTok about this. If you follow me at Real Ishaan S on TikTok, I made a TikTok about this a few weeks ago. I think Democrats would greatly benefit from having a convention of this sort. I think there is something needed to motivate the Democratic base. It is very dead right now, in the sense that people are not motivated by any means to get involved, to get advocating. I mean, yeah, we had no kings. Yes, we had those handful of moments like with Senator Cory Booker's 25-hour-long speech. But Democrats, for the most part, don't know who their leadership are. They don't know what their policy priorities are, and they don't know how to push back against the chaos of the White House. And so what is needed is something like a convention, something where we can convene Democrats across the country, introduce leaders in the party, rising stars. I mean, I think of, no, I don't actually want to name names here, so I won't name names. The leaders know who they are, and I'm sure many of you know who some of those leaders are. I think these conventions should be an opportunity, especially a midterm convention, where it's not about one person, because in a presidential convention, it becomes about one person. But in this midterm convention, I would imagine that it's not. I think it would be a perfect place for everybody to get a speaking slot, to get a chance to present and share what their platform is. Maybe it can be a soft launch for some 2028 candidates. I don't know. I just think that there's so much potential for Democrats to be able to extract from an event like a DNC 2026. And also, you know, they're not the party in power. They're not running on a particular record that is going to be unpopular. You know, I think in 2022, if Democrats had a midterm convention, I think it would have still been good. Like, they would still have things to run on, such as capping the cost of insulin and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Like, there were things that they could have bragged about, but at that point, Democrats were still super unpopular, not like they aren't right now. But back then, they also had a record to have to deal with. Right now, they don't. Right now, they are completely out of power. And so if they wanted to make a case to the American people, a centralized convention to make that address, to make that case, I think would be so powerful. And I think it's no certainty that it's going to happen, because we're also in very uncertain times. You never know what's going to happen. Like, you don't even know what's going to happen freaking tomorrow anymore. So I think we could pull hope, and I would love to see, you know, an RNC and a DNC. I love conventions. They're so much fun, they're big political nerd parties. It's like, for political nerds like me, it's like our Super Bowl and Olympics and Oscars all rolled into one. So I think it would be so much fun to do it, but it's logistically hard, and we are in such uncertain times. Like, you cannot plan for the future out far like that without at least some degree of it. But in some news, at least, President Trump did announce today, on September 16th, it's September 17th today, that's my bad, announced yesterday that the GOP will in fact be holding a midterm convention. Again, just because Donald Trump said it's going to happen doesn't mean that it's fully on board to happen. But, you know, cool stuff. Like, it seems like he wants to make it happen, and so I think it will happen. We'll keep an eye out for that. The DNC, again, like I said, is considering it. It seems like they're very on board with something like this happening. My insiders at the DNC have told me as such, and so I would love to see what progress they make on that discussion. But we'll be keeping track of it, of course, as always, here on the show. But that's all we have for today. I have an interview coming up next with Executive Director of Men4Choice, Aaron Bos-Lun. It's a great conversation, and I think it's an important conversation to have in this moment, especially on our side of the aisle, where there are real discussions about the involvement of people in the pro-choice movement. And so I'm looking forward to that discussion and sharing that with you. Stick around and take a look at that. So, one of the biggest pieces of the news, biggest pieces of politics, really, that has been in our collective minds for it's crazy to say now, nearly 3 years, is the state of reproductive health care in this country. I mean, as many of you know, back in June of 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, uplifting years and decades of precedent in this country, and now leaves half of this country's population with fewer rights than their parents and grandparents. And so, what we've been watching over the past few years is an effort to restore those freedoms, to fight for those freedoms amidst all sorts of inhumane and sometimes crazy abortion bans that we are seeing across the country. If you follow me on social media, you'll know that I had the chance to sit down with someone who has faced some of these abortion bans, Samantha Cassiano from Texas, who had to deal with the Texas abortion bans. Now, my guest for today's episode is someone who is a leader in the fight against this attack on freedom in our country, and he is doing the work of organizing young men in this space, doing a lot of the good work and making sure that folks know that this is not just an issue for one particular group of people, but is something that should concern all of us. Joining me today to talk about the state of reproductive health care in this country, the work of organizing, and a lot more, I am joined by Executive Director of Men4Choice, Aaron Bos-Lun. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishaan S show today.
It's great to be with you, Ishaan. I was really glad we met when I was up in Wisconsin for the panel we did while we were taking action for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. And by the way, that was an example of when people band together, they can win, and you can beat Elon Musk's $20 million. And I'm really glad to be with you now.
Of course. And it's so great to have you on. And yes, that's right. We did meet right before the Supreme Court election. That was something that folks knew across the country. I mean, I'll be talking to folks from everywhere and I'll bring up I worked on the Supreme Court race and everyone knows Susan Crawford and they will know the 1849 abortion ban. That is no longer a thing in this state. So great stuff indeed. And it is an honor to have you on today. Before we get into our interview, why don't you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, well, like Ishaan said, my name is Aaron Bos-Lun. I'm the executive director of Men4Choice nationally, where we activate, educate, and mobilize passively pro-choice men to get off the sidelines and into the fight as allies for reproductive freedom. The way I got into this was a little bit of a winding path, and it's part of why I believe so strongly in not just organizing for reproductive freedom, but organizing young people and young men for reproductive freedom. Was that and I'm going to age myself here a little bit, but I am the age I am. I was a sophomore in high school in the 2004 election when George W. Bush was up for re-election. And revisionist history aside, George W. Bush was the second worst president in the history of the United States and made all kinds of errors that did enormous damage to people's lives. And one of them was that headed into the 2004 election, he was adamant about the need for a national constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. He called it a threat to the American way of life. And, he basically had two policies. It was being anti-terror and anti-gay, and not necessarily in that order. And I was a closeted high school sophomore at the time and saw more than half of the country agree with him on that issue and saw him win and saw over 30 states in the coming years ban same-sex marriage in their constitutions. And I'd never met a gay person in my life. I'd never seen a gay person on TV. It was not something that I thought was possible to live a decent life. And then I see the president of the United States, who was rankly incompetent, clearly incompetent, but people were so against the gays that they were willing to reelect that man and let him drive the country further into the ground. And then in the 10 years since, things changed. And I was able to come out in 2011 when I was in college about the age you are now. And gay marriage became nationally accepted. And now even the people who are against gay marriage pretend to be for it because it's a majority opinion. And, let me, give you a little insight into that. It wasn't the gays that changed their mind in the 20 years since. It wasn't the LGBT community. It was everyone else. And so when I think about how scared I was as a teenager and how much I thought I had to hide this part of who I was in order to live a life that I now live, and I can have a ring on my finger and be engaged as a gay man, it was the allies who brought us to that place. And so I want to be that for everyone who's under attack by this government right now. And specifically, as I started to get involved in political work in the years after that 2004 election and looking how to be involved, I didn't see many ways for young people to get involved. I volunteered and I would go to every group that I could, and it just seemed like there was a problem on the progressive side where there weren't effective mechanisms to harness the energies of young people. And so that's why by the time I got to Men4Choice in 2019, I pushed for the creation of a youth fellowship program. We piloted it with 7 guys that summer. We're launching it again next week, and it's going to have 110 guys involved who are learning how to organize, who are learning about the issue of reproductive freedom and how to directly reach other young men. And so I'm trying to be the person that I wish I had when I was in my teens and my 20s, which is an organizer who's creating on-ramps where we can meaningfully take action together.
That is a very incredibly powerful story. I mean, I was going to actually ask you how where you got your start in politics, so that perfectly got right there. And I mean, um, it's so again, like I said, it's just powerful to use that experience to then become the person that you didn't have. And I think in this moment, we definitely need that. So I want to ask, I want to go get right into it. We're going to get very real here. In the 2024 election, young people were the group that I think the progressive side dropped the ball on the most, and particularly among young men. Your work at Men4Choice is that specific demographic. Um, you mentioned the fellowship, but what are other ways that you and other leaders in this space are working to mobilize young people and young men specifically? Because it is definitely something that the left needs to be looking at.
Oh, the left shit the bed catastrophically with young people in 2024, and especially young men. And it's an interesting thing because if you look at the entire country, and I'd love to be wrong on this, please correct me if I am wrong, we're arguably the only civic space on the left with a self-generating pipeline that is focused on reaching young men directly. I wish that weren't true, and I say that, and I'm waiting for someone to correct me, and please correct me if you know of one.
I
But
don't, yeah, I mean,
I don't think
for
there
you
is
guys.
one. Yeah, and the problem among many problems, there's an inability to reach young people, but there's also a problem where pro-choice men often have an instinct, and it's a good instinct, to think, well, that's not my fight. It's not my body. That's a women's issue. That's for people who can get pregnant. And therefore, I'm not gonna take up space. And here's the problem with that. The anti-choice men don't have that reservation at all.
Yeah.
And so if you look at states throughout the country, in 2023, the year after Roe was overturned, there were 1,572 votes taken to ban or criminalize abortion by state legislators across the country. 86% of those votes were cast by men. So men are leading the charge to ban and criminalize abortion. And pro-choice men like you and me, Ishaan, are tending to do nothing. And I can't think of any issue in American life where half of the people who hold the position, because more than half of men believe in the right to a legal abortion, it's actually above 60%, and there isn't as much of a gender divide as people think. But pro-choice men look at this and say, oh, the noble thing is to sit this one out. And in reality, that leaves a situation where it's only women and directly impacted people who are pro-choice against all of the anti-choice women and men. And there's no other issue where half of the people who hold that position are totally silent, passive, and inactive. And so we need to do a lot more. And it's a complicated thing because I mean, you don't need to tell me. Like my starting point in government was seeing men in government trying to take away my right to control my body as a gay person. So I have a misgiving around that front too. But it's not noble to sit this out just because it's not your body under attack. The thing to
Mhm.
do is to say, how can I show up as an ally? How can I do something? And we have our fellowship program. We run communications. We're directly reaching young men. And working with our partners, we've come up with more and more aggressive plans of how to take that to larger scale because there's a real issue here where people on the left aren't talking to young men and people on the right are. And if your message to young men is no message, or your message is no message with a kind of subtle, like, you actually are kind of an asshole. You're a problem because of who you are. If we just go to for like first organizing principles, you can't ignore a group and then repeatedly call that group an asshole and then be surprised that group doesn't do want to do stuff with you. So it's
Right.
pretty basic. It's talking to people directly, and then in our case, it's saying, here's how you stand up as an ally. You're not meant to be a leader on this issue, but if you love the women in your life, if you believe in the basic freedom to control your own body, you're part of the problem if you're sitting this out. You're not helping.
So one of the things that I saw with the right, and I've been tracking this for years now, and I've been, people I know in politics, I've been like, hey, I mean, they're kind of doing it, is they were figuring out ways to go directly to young men. I mean, we obviously had folks coming onto college campuses. We had people organizing in groups and specific groups and reaching those young people through, I mean, whatever avenue you can think of. So how are you guys at Men for Choice reaching these people? How are you like literally like making that contact?
Yeah. Well, the core of our whole organizing model is based on a 10-week fellowship for men under the age of 35. And during those 10 weeks, you learn about the issue and you hear directly from speakers. You mentioned Samantha Cassiano. She comes and speaks to every group of fellows in the second week, and she talks about how she was denied the right to an abortion and how she was forced to carry a non-viable pregnancy for 3 months, and then give birth. And her baby Halo was born with purple skin and blood coming out of the eyes and suffocating like a fish out of water. And men don't realize the harm caused by abortion bans. They don't realize that people like Samantha are suffering and continue to suffer very directly as a result of these things. So in the fellowship, there's an educational piece, but there's also an action piece where you need to organize three peer-to-peer, what we call community conversations, and directly reach other young men. So you have young men who are learning about this issue, learning how to step up as allies, learning the facts of the harm caused by abortion bans, and then organizing groups of their peers that they can reach in a way that other people can't because those are existing relationships. And that's our main base building tactic is to directly have young men reach other young men based on organizing training and based on hearing directly from the longtime leaders of this movement. The second thing that we do is digital communications, and so we are
Mhm.
expanding and kind of recentering our communications focus to be in the voice of young men, especially alumni fellows, directed towards young men. Our social media gets over 2 million impressions per month, and we're looking
Wow.
at more and more ways to focus that not just on a general audience, but specifically on young men. And then the third piece is direct action. So we have organizers on the ground. Alan Tipple organized that panel in Wisconsin that you and I met at in March at UW-Madison. We have organizers on the ground who are creating entry points for young men. And we also take action through Men4Choice Advocacy, our 501(c)(4), at election time. So as I speak, we have three Men4Choice fellows who were hired by Men4Choice Advocacy, who are organizing actions in Virginia for the special election in Virginia. Yesterday, Tuesday night, we had our first one held virtually, and we reached 135,000 voters directly in Virginia,
Wow.
supporting the work of our partner. And we always support partners. Repro Rising Virginia, we say, hey, we can get large groups of men to show up and help you do the things you need to do. So we reached 135,000 voters less than 24 hours ago in Virginia. I'm coming back from Virginia. I was with them the other day. I'll be back there knocking doors on October 11th, and then again on November 1st. And so there's the fellowship, which is for men who really feel ready to take this step as a leader and are serious about learning organizing and want to directly reach others. Online communication and speaking out. People spend 6 hours a day or more on their phones, so reaching young men directly where they are in that way. And then finally, on the ground action, both ongoing organizing and most importantly, stepping up for partners so that they're not in this on their own. They shouldn't be in this on their own. We should all stand together.
It's important. It's because it's like I've said. I mean, I've been talking to people and I've been tracking it for years. Like that was one of the huge shortfalls. We weren't directly reaching these people, and I was watching it with my own eyes with my friends because I grew up with the people that ended up voting for Trump in many cases. And so it's good to see this huge push. And I think we're beginning to see it more broadly on the left, but I have also been keeping track of you guys at Men4Choice, and I am seeing that action, and that is exactly what we need. And so when you are recruiting these young men and you're reaching these people, what is your realistic goal with this? I mean, obviously it is to create leaders, but where do you hope to see um, alumni from your programs, members of your group? Like, where do you intend on seeing them in this movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're growing, I'd say, semi-exponentially right now. And semi-exponentially because our commitment is to get as big as we can while preserving the quality of our programs and making sure we can really deliver for partners. And so, like I said, the fellowship originally had 7 guys in it 5 years ago. We'll have 90 fellows starting next 5 days from now.
Good
Um,
for you guys.
and we'll have 25 alumni who are back as peer coaches and mentors and as the leaders of the fellowship. So that's going to be 110 guys together. They're going to organize 270 educational programs that will directly reach their peers, and they're going to engage thousands of men directly in the process there. And so it's an open question of how big the fellowship can get. It's continually gotten bigger. And again, that clip has increased. So we're up to over 400 alumni now. And again, that number is going to be nearly 500 by the end of the year. And we're now in a position, we're going into next year, we should be able to train 300 next year alone if we were to run it 3 times. We don't typically run the fellowship in the fall of midterms or presidentials, but certainly be able to train 200 and 250 in a very high quality kind of way. To your question about what do we want to see alumni doing and like where does that reach? We had a very close relationship with the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. We did 9 events with him throughout the country, and he was a tremendous example of a man using his platform to try to advocate for others, advocate for abortion rights, stand with the women in his life.
Hmm.
And when we first had coffee with him, it was January of 2023 in Tallahassee, Florida. Um, didn't quite know what he was gonna think. We were, in our 7th year as an organization then, and the fellowship at that point was like 25 guys at a time, and suddenly the White House has taken interest, the second gentleman. It's like, is this real life? What's happening here? And I told him about the fellowship program, and he said, I bet if you trained 10,000 fellows, it would change the course of US history because of the ripple effect,
Yeah.
right? But he said, if I had done something like this in my 20s, I would have made different decisions over the last 30 years, and I would have reached so many people along the way. And young men can uniquely reach other young men in a way that has a multiplier effect. We see this when we expand into new states, that whenever we're in a new state, young guys always have this like, is it really okay for me to talk about it? And they get a little hesitation and they're less likely to apply. And once we've been active in a place like we've been in Florida for many years, in Georgia for many years, we're getting there in North Carolina, we're ending our first year in Wisconsin, we just began expanding into Michigan, we've been in Arizona a few years. The calculation shifts from, is it really okay for me to talk about this? I don't know if it's okay for guys to talk about this, to, wait a minute, I know 2 or 3 guys who I've seen organizing events for Reaper Freedom, who I see speaking out online. It's actually kind of messed up that I'm doing nothing. And so, in a long-term sense, we believe in going big by going small, in the sense of people really being empowered to reach the others directly in their life and doing that in increasingly large ways over time. And I think the future of Men4Choice is in the leadership of our alumni, because they can take the emotional burden off of women. Women should not be on their own trying to tell men they should care about this. Men need to be demonstrating to other men the right way to take action on this, and actions speak louder than words. And so doing that as much as we can, building our base in that way, bringing in our fellows. We have someone on staff whose full-time job is to support our alumni and their impact, and then also being able to reach people not in the hundreds or the thousands in a direct way, and that matters a lot, but also reaching
Mhm.
them in millions through direct targeting on social media.
That's that's a that's a pretty good strategy, honestly. Like, I mean, I'm telling you, you've seen the results of it, but it is incredibly effective. because it's those one-on-one conversations. I think something that I've probably the biggest mistake I've seen in politics is like you equip these leaders and then they go speak to like 500 people and then like you expect them to go change minds like that. It happens one conversation at a time, really. And I
Yeah.
think that's incredibly powerful and it's great.
Well, yeah, and it's important to go speak to 500 people, but what you should
Right.
do is follow up with those people
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we've somehow lost sight of this. And to their credit, not in the ways they do it, but to their credit, the right wing treats people a lot better than the left wing does, treats their people a lot
Yeah,
better
yeah.
than we do, right? Like you need to be treated like a person, not like a cog in the machine. And yes, we could have a conversation. I mean, again, you don't need to tell me about anti-LGBT attitudes on the right and like put it on the
Yeah.
list of ways that they don't treat people well. But for those that they see in their in-group, they do a much better job talking with people and getting to know what are your values, what's driving you to this. And there's sort of a phrase, like I can't remember who came up with this, but it's a good quote of like a progressive who loves humanity but hates people. And you can't be that way, right? Like
Yeah.
I say to our staff all the time, if you're going to be a progressive, your first duty, you're going to make a claim to creating a better world. Your first fucking duty is to demonstrate that a better world is possible by the way you treat people. And your second duty is to be excellent. Because if you're going to say, like, I have these ideas about how to reorganize society, and then you can't get people to show up to your stuff and you treat people badly, you have no credibility on your face. So you're right. It's one-on-one conversation done at scale with thousands and thousands of people taking that on because the majority is on our side on the issues. Where they're not on our side is the lack of messaging and the way we treat people. And we need to change that. We need to change that badly.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Let's switch gears just a little bit. So the state of reproductive freedom in this country is however you would, insert adjective here. It's chaotic to say the least, but we have seen wins. For folks who have been with the show, we talked about what happened in Kansas. We talked about what happened in Ohio, like places you wouldn't expect
Yeah.
victories for reproductive freedom, but it just goes to show that people care about freedom.
Yeah.
But even then, we are seeing for every victory we see in spots like this, the places where they don't care about these freedoms, they double down even more. And you're based out of Florida. You're organizing in Georgia. Um, when you see the decisions that these people are making, what is the most logical solution to these problems? Is it federal action? Is it state level organizing? Like, where do you see
Yeah.
future of fixing this crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two things that need to be done, and they both need to be done, which is why this is going to be a 40 or 50-year fight. Which, by the way, the effort to overturn Roe v. Wade was a 50-year fight on
Yeah,
their end.
yeah.
The Supreme Court ruled 7-2 against them, and in the 1970s, it was considered consensus opinion that abortion was just going to be a fact of American life. And they didn't throw up their hands and say, "Oh, we lost this one. I guess let's move on to the next thing." They doubled down on a long-term strategy that included youth organizing, that included judicial overhaul, that included inventing terms like pro-life to reframe the way we talk about the conversation. Um, and so there's a whole element of this that has to do with changing culture, that we
Hmm.
need to change the way men speak, act, think, and engage on this issue. And policy is downstream from culture. And so that's the second part, is that you absolutely need to change policies. But policies flow from cultural attitudes. And I imagine a day where it's unthinkable for someone in government, especially a man in government, to try to pass laws controlling the bodies of women or people who can get pregnant. And that's going to take a lot of work to get there. But in the immediate, it means electing better people to public office, just like we're doing in Virginia right now through Men4Choice advocacy. And
Yeah.
to your question about like what's the exact mechanism? Well, the answer is there isn't an exact mechanism because the opposition works really hard, and it is really important to build power at the state level. So even those states you mentioned, Kansas and Ohio, um, these same sort of conservative people who love to talk about states' rights, you know, spoiler alert, they don't actually care about states' rights. That's a cover for their preferred policy position. So if a state passes a policy at a level that they don't like, they then are against that and they want a national
Mm,
ban on that thing. And if a city passes a policy they don't like, then they're against that. Like it's a total bullshit cover up to try to make green position sound more respectable. And so we need
right.
power at the state level. Your state legislator is probably going to have more impact on this issue than your member of Congress.
Yeah.
So state legislators, as well as, and I can't underscore this strong enough. And maybe some of you are going to hear what I'm about to say, and you're going to think like, oh, that's bullshit. This guy is wrong. And if you think that, then I'm not talking to you. But I'm talking to those of you who are serious about building and exercising power. Real power in our society comes from small groups organizing and taking direct action, focusing on what they can control. You exercise more power if you have 5 one-on-one conversations where you can move people to action, and in turn, they can have conversations with 5 others and 5 others. You exercise more power through that, or someone who like organizes their campus and gets 30 people to turn out to something exercises more power than the combined efforts of everyone who has just bitched on their social media feed with no aim in mind combined. Real
Hmm.
power happens person through person with each of us saying, what can I control? Not what I can't. What can I control? And am I doing everything I can to reach the people around me? And the problem with that is no one person can do it all, including, by the way, the President of the United States. No one has total power in this country. But if more of us on our side say, I'm going to do what I can do rather than throw my hands up because I can't do everything, we're going to be in a much better place. And so it's state level power, it's electing better people to public office, it's speaking out, it's reaching people like you do in your show, Ishaan, and bringing people like me and some, especially Samantha, on. But it's also, if you're listening to this right now, being serious about how can you reach the people in your life. It's not good enough to hear this conversation and then like feel virtuous because you heard this conversation. Who are you going to tell about it? And one person is always better than zero.
I like that. And I think that's gonna, I usually like when I'm doing these interviews, I like to bookmark in my head what I would want to clip and get out there. That is exactly the message that I would want getting out there. Um, and I hope people really resonate with that message. I mean, I'm sure they will. And I hope it really gets going. And there are so many things that I want to ask you about, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to fit this question. I had a couple of questions. We're going to try to work them into one here, and answer how best you can. So it's a two-part question. So first, we are in this time of chaos. Obviously, we have the big ugly bill that they just passed. We have attacks on freedom, all sorts of freedom, not to mention. But like we are in this chaotic time, and people feel often helpless. I mean, we talk about telling people to pick themselves up and go and do something, but people don't feel motivated right now, and it's just that hard initial push to get someone to cross that line. So, first question is um, how do we motivate people? I mean, people of all backgrounds. You are a leader in the space, and so people are looking up to you right now, and other folks. How do we get those people to stand up? And then, second one is not super related, but I'm going to try to relate it. In today's episode, we talked a little bit about how Democrats are considering hosting a convention next year ahead of the 2026 midterms. I've heard from my DNC insider people that apparently it's a serious discussion. So that's a great way, I think, to get folks interested, to introduce leaders, and to bring light issues such as reproductive freedom, especially what we have seen across the country over the past few years. And so through that very long-winded question, my question for you is, how do we get people to stand up? And how do we get people to cross that initial burden
Yeah.
of willingly getting out there? Because especially what we have seen in the last couple of weeks, it's just so demotivating. Um, so
Yeah.
over
So,
yours.
so if I'm understanding correctly about how do we improve morale and how do we convene and take action? Is that an accurate summary of the two
I
questions?
think that's perfect. Yes.
Great. Well, really great questions, really important questions. To the question of morale, it's a tough one, and we're all we're all feeling it. I mean, I'm pretty tunnel visioned, and like I focus on things at Men4Choice, making Men4Choice as strong as I possibly can, and trying to tune out the noise, right? Like if you scroll through Instagram through a couple hours, you've accomplished probably nothing. Maybe slightly more than nothing, but not a lot more than nothing. But
Hmm.
like my fiance, almost every night when I'm done with work, we'll get on the couch and be like, "Did you hear Trump did this and Trump did that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it never ends, right?" And so I think the first thing is recognizing that we're all in it, and that's a real thing. I'm a former high school history teacher, and I am completely convinced, 100% convinced. And I don't know whether it's in 20 years or 5 years or 50 years, but when the books are written on this era, one of the things that is going to be said is no one knew what the fuck they were doing, right? Everyone is in, but no one was willing to say that. And
Yeah.
given that, are you reaching the other people in your life in the way you can? That might mean doing something like applying to the Men4Choice Fellowship. We're an on-ramp. That might mean getting involved in a local organization. That might mean you feel particularly drawn to something about immigration or LGBT issues or whatever it is. But whatever that thing is to take stock of where you are first and think seriously as a person. Where am I? You might not be in the place to give a sustained commitment, but it's better to do one thing than nothing at all. So consider where you are as a person, consider what your capacity is. And then, second, whatever you do, do something. The act of doing something makes you feel better. And,
Mm.
people have this idea, um, young people and older people, but young people, I think in particular, that it's like there will come a moment of perfect clarity where I will wake up one morning and like Greek mythology, like Athena being birthed fully into the world, and now I am motivated to do the thing that's going to fix it all. And the truth is that doesn't happen. It happens through every conversation you have. It happens because you decided one time to phone bank for an hour and a half for the Wisconsin Supreme Court or with Men4Choice on September 30th. We have our next virtual one. If you're in Virginia, you can join me on October 11th. Every one of those things will help you feel better. So, to the morale piece, it's how do we reach the people around us? And then also, how do we take actions that by being in motion actually solve the problem, being in our own head? To the question of convening, community building is essential right now. And so much of what we do at Men4Choice is around that. The fellowship has grown to a point where we're now this year going to have our first ever convenings of alumni fellows, these sort of regional conferences.
Oh,
We'll be doing one in Virginia at the end of this month. We'll be doing one in Georgia in November. And then next spring, we're still finalizing where they're going to be, but we're looking at Wisconsin, North Carolina, potentially Florida, potentially Arizona, potentially Michigan. And so
great.
we'll be creating those on ramps too. And so if you're interested in being part of those, you should apply to the Men4Choice Fellowship in the spring, or you can get involved in our digital army, or you can reach out, like shoot a message to our Instagram page, or my email is aaron@men4choice.org with a four in it, and we'll get you situated for action. But I think it's kind of paradoxical because the solution to problems of morale are taking action, and action happens in community. And whatever way you can, whether that's with us or whether that's with a group on your campus at UW-Madison, wherever it is, find a way to take action and do that thing. And something is always better than nothing.
Thank you so much for that. We're running out of time here now, but I really appreciate um, the work that you're doing, especially, but that message, because it is a little paradoxical for sure. And I've had a lot of conversations with people over the past 8 months, hard to say 8 months now, but 8 months of all of this. But that's the message that I'm hearing people say. Aaron, before we do hop off here, are there any parting thoughts that you would like to share with my audience?
I want to thank you for what you're doing, Ishaan, and you're in a way that I really admire, reaching people directly. And that's so important in this moment. And I appreciate that. And for everyone listening, and you might be like, yo, that guy Aaron sounds like he probably knows what he's doing, or maybe you thought something differently or whatever. But that's not me. If that's where you are, I challenge you on that. And you don't necessarily need to get involved in Men4Choice. I mean, we're literally an on-ramp for action. And so, like, it's a one-stop shop. Come and we can direct you to a thing to do. It doesn't have to be with us. Go somewhere else if you would like. Talk to someone you know is concerned with this. And whatever your current place is, commit to doing something not 3 months from now, not 3 years from now, not when the world has perfectly conformed to your ideals and vision, but figure out a way to do something now. And history is always written by the small groups of people who choose to do something while everyone else talks about how that thing can't be done. And so, like, you're doing it in a way, Ishaan, whoever's listening to this, don't let these words be abstract. Commit to take action. And in a moment of fragmentation, just talking to the people around you is an action. Hopefully, it doesn't end there, but that's infinitely better than whining and bitching about how there's nothing you can do.
Aaron Bos-Lun with Men4Choice, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an honor to have you on and to have this discussion. I hope that we can have you back on very soon. I think, as you said, this fight's going to be going on for a while, so we'd love to hear your words, your leadership along the way.
I appreciate it. Well, my mom's side of the family is from Milwaukee, so I'm always happy to get back to Wisconsin. Many of my best childhood memories in the Milwaukee area.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much to Aaron Bos-Lun for joining me for that interview today. It was a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are on some of the politics we discussed, the issue we discussed, and so much more. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and go subscribe to my Substack. It's a great way to stay in touch with the show. I try to post full versions of interviews. I'm actually backlogged on that, so I need to post a few more interviews. But it's a great way to stay in touch with the show. Another way to stay in touch with the show is by following us on Instagram at the Ishaan S Show. I like to post clips as well as other work that I'm doing. You can follow me at Real Ishaan Shrivastava on Instagram. I love to share my work in politics, my work here on the show. It's a great way to get in touch. You can follow me on TikTok at the same handle at Real Ishaan Shrivastava, and you can follow me on Blue Sky at ishanshrivastava.bluesky.social. Alrighty, thank you so much for joining us for our episode here today. Keep the advocacy going, keep using your voice. We'll see you in the next one.